Okay, welcome everybody to the Monday night halacha class. Tonight's topic is Chalav Yisrael or Chalav Ishmael. Which one are we allowed to, or which one do we have to consume? So, very interesting topic, and it starts all the way from the Gemara, comes all the way to the Achronim, and then we're going to see if it applies. And if we still need to keep this Gezerah Derabanan. The rabbis made a couple decrees, we know, in regards to food. For example, not eating the bread made by a goy, or not eating food cooked by a goy. Another one of those decrees was not to eat or consume milk that was milked by a goy. So now the Gemara Masechet Avodah Zarah, Lamed Hayim with Bet 35b, discusses what the potential issue. Why can we not have milk milked by a goy? So the Gemara says, Chalav l'mayne choshla. What is the problem with milk? Why would the rabbis make a decree about milk? So the Gemara says, in the conclusion, then maybe they're going to mix non-kosher milk in there. So the Gemara says, even though there's potentially a way to discern which one is kosher milk, which is not non-kosher milk, they have maybe slightly a different appearance, and they also, one curdles into cheese and one does not. So then maybe if you try to make cheese out of it, you'll see if it's kosher, if it's not. The Gemara says, nevertheless, there is no way to have clarity, because even when you curdle the milk, there's not a curdle 100%, there's always going to have some liquid left behind, and the Gemara says that you cannot tell 100% that there's not kosher milk in there, or if there is, if there's not. So therefore, that's what the potential reason. So it comes out just simply from the Gemara. We're going to see maybe this is not the conclusion we come out with, but seemingly from the Gemara, the whole reason why the rabbi said it's not allowed, because maybe they're going to put camel milk, maybe they're going to put donkey milk, maybe they're going to put other milk in there, and they're going to sell it as cow milk, and then you're going to end up drinking non-kosher milk as well. So now, the Rambam says that any milk owned by a non-Jew, right, is not allowed to be bought and consumed. Why? Shema arav bo chalav be'emat mea. For the same reason that maybe he mixed in a non-kosher milk. So you see the Rambam says this in the Shulchan Aruch in Yoreh Deah Kuf Tetvav Asif Aleph. He says in chapter 115 in Yoreh Deah, he says milk that was milked by a goy, and the Jew did not supervise him milking the milk, asur. Why? Shema irev bo chalav tameh. Because maybe he mixed into it non-kosher milk. So you see the Rambam and Shulchan Aruch both say milk milked by a non-Jew is asur, because maybe they mixed non-kosher milk in there. Now, the question becomes now, how do we make things into Chalav Yisrael? What makes it from non-Chalav Yisrael to Chalav Yisrael? So the Gemara Masechet Avodah Zarah says that if you have a Jew who's standing by the goy milking it, he's watching him, right? He's supervising, mashgiach as they call it, right? Mashgiach means to observe, right? He's an observer. So he observes him milking the cow, and now what? The goy, his job, they hired him, is to milk some cow milk. And what's he going to do? He's going to mix in some non-kosher milk? No, he's not. There's a Jew watching him. There's a Jew observing him, so there's no way he's going to mix in non-kosher milk. So therefore, for sure, it'll be kosher milk, and this will be branded as Chalav Yisrael. Yes?
Let's say you have a factory of milk.
We're going to get there. What you're saying...
When you say Jew supervising, is there like a Jew to one person, one Jew per person? Like, how does that work?
As long as the goy is being observed by a Jew.
What, 24/7?
You want to know about cameras. Do cameras count as a Jew observing the non-Jew? Maybe.
How many cameras? Let's say you have a factory. You're all mashgiach there, one Jew. That's my mashgiach.
No. The case in the Gemara, was there was one goy and there was one Jew, and he was just standing aside. The Gemara says that he doesn't need to be constantly viewing him. The Gemara says...
Basically coming in and out.
Yeah, the Gemara says that if he stands up, he could see him. If he sits down, he doesn't see him. And this causes a fear. This causes I don't want to lie to him. He could bust in any moment and look at me mixing in non-kosher milk, so therefore he doesn't do the entire activity wrong. He does it right and does what he's supposed to do. So you see that by just having a Jew there, the Gemara says, irtute mirtat. Fear he has fear. He is fearful, basically, that he's going to get caught, and therefore he doesn't mix anything to the milk. So that's one solution for making Chalav Yisrael, is you have a Jew, even if he's not there every second, looking every second what he's doing, as long as he's supervising, he's actually there, and he can pop in any moment. It says the Gemara, he has fear, and he's not going to do it wrong. So now the question is, what if we know that there's no non-kosher milk in the vicinity? Okay, let's say I understand in the old country, I used to go down the street, I knocked on Uncle Rochelle's door, right? And I asked, Uncle Rochelle, how do you say milk? Malako, yes, you have milk. He says, yeah, I just milked my cow. Here, I have, what's his name, right? My worker, what's his name? Let's call him Ishmael, right? He was milking all morning. He was by himself. He was milking the cow. So I told him, hey, what if you don't know if he went to the donkey next door, he went to the camel nearby, he went to some other animal and gave you this milk. How do you know he gave you the milk that's from the cow? So you're right, because there's a lot of animals everywhere. It's very easy to get from the other animal. There's nothing stopping you. But today, or more recently, it's harder to get, it's actually more expensive to get non-cow milk, and it's not so many non-cows around. If you go to these big farms, there's not necessarily other animals there besides for cows. So therefore, maybe there's a reason to say we're not so worried anymore that they're going to mix in non-kosher milk. So the Mordechai, which is a Rishon on the Gemara Masechet Avodah Zarah, he discusses this idea, and he says, this is the Gemara said, if there's nothing else non-kosher in the flock, it's okay, it's allowed. He says some people want to learn from here that if there's no other non-kosher animals around, and you don't need a Jew watching over the goy milking the cow. And he says, Ta'ut hu biyadam. He says this is a big mistake, and that is not true, that even if you have only cows and only kosher animals in the flock, you still need a Jew there to supervise. That's what the Mordechai says, who's a Rishon. The Shulchan Aruch says, like this, that someone was milking, a goy was milking a cow in his house. The Shulchan Aruch says, if there was no other non-kosher animals in the flock, and there was a Jew there watching, it's allowed. What does it sound like from Shulchan Aruch? Even if there was no other non-kosher animals, if there's not a Jew there, it's not allowed. Shulchan Aruch says you have to have a Jew there. The Taz says the same thing, but the Ramah brings a leniency in a different case. The Ramah talks about a case over there in the same Seif. He talks about a case where you have maidservants. He says, Shvachot shecholvot be'emot Beit Yisrael. You have maidservants working in a Jew's house. Okay, it's a Jew's house, and the maidservants work for the Jew, right?
Maidservants are not Jewish, right?
Right, and they're milking the cow. He says if there's nothing blocking your vision from them, and there's no worry that there's non-kosher animals there, mutar lechatchil, you can let them milk, and you don't have to be on top of them.
What do you mean no view between? What does that mean?
Meaning there's no, it won't be a case where they'll be out of your view and you won't know what will be happening. Technically, there's no resources for them to get in between you're where you are and where they're milking. There's no resources for them to get non-kosher stuff. Rather, he's in your premise or he's in their house, and in their house there's nothing tameh, and there's nowhere else they can get non-tameh stuff. He says over there it will be allowed, but this is already the Ramah. Since it's in a Jewish home, or it's a Jewish neighborhood, we're not concerned that he's going to add non-kosher. So you see that Ramah's leniency is by Jewish house, Jewish neighborhood. But if it will be a random company that's all owned by Goyim, and they all milk the cows by themselves, nothing to do with the Jewish house, Jewish neighborhood, so seemingly this Ramah leniency wouldn't apply.
Why can't you say they're going to go to another neighborhood and get the non-kosher stuff? Now what does that mean, non-kosher? What are you saying? There's no non-kosher animals in Jewish neighborhoods?
Right.
That's what he's saying.
Yeah, basically.
So why can't he say, oh, he's going to go to another neighborhood and get that? You don't have to.
I guess we're not choshesh. We're not choshesh for that. We're not suspicious that might happen.
He's not choshesh for that.
Good. So now the Prehadash, which is an Acharon, he lived around the year 1659, 1660. He died when he was 39 years old. His name was Rav Chizkiah ben David de Silva. He was born in Italy. He ended up moving to Yerushalayim. He also lived in Amsterdam. He was a great Chacham. he wrote the great Sefer Prehadash, which is very, very studied in yeshivas and in Cholels and by halachic authorities, by all rabbis today, even though he only died at the age of 39. But he was a great sage, and he gives a big leniency. And he says, if there's no chalav tameh, there is no, in the vicinity, non-kosher milk, and there is no reason to add non-kosher milk into the milk. Why? Because non-kosher milk is more expensive. He says, in such a case, you do not prohibit milk milked by a goy, even though a Jew did not see it. The Prehadash gives a leniency where there's no access to non-kosher milk around. No one has pigs running around, no one has donkeys running around, nobody has camels running around, and the only thing the goyim are milking is cows. And also, even if they would want to add pig milk or camel milk or donkey milk, it'd be more expensive. It would be counterintuitive for their business. He says in such a case, you have a leniency to drink milk by a goy, even though there is no Jew watching him. Yeah. He says
it's like the Ramah, basically.
No, he's more than the Ramah. The Ramah was talking about the house of a Jew or a Jewish neighborhood. He's saying, let it be a goy's house, let it be a goyish neighborhood, as long as we know in their neighborhood there's no non-kosher animals, and it's counterproductive for men to add non-kosher milk because it's more expensive. So therefore, you could be lenient. He says a or. He says his or.
So like a factory.
Yeah.
There's no pigs there.
Good.
It's just cows.
Good. So now the Aruch HaShulchan and the Chatan Sofer, who are also Achronim, they argue. And they argue why. They say that first of all, that in such a case, even though you would have no reason, right? If there was no non-kosher animals around, why would they mix it in? How would they get it, right? And on top of that, it's more expensive. Why would they add it in? So there's another reason, right? There's a different reason to say they wouldn't add it in. He says even though those reasons don't apply, you should know the rabbi's enactment still exists. Then the rabbis, when they made something asur as a takana, right, as a decree, we cannot come and undo their decrees unless we are of the same stature as they were, right? This is a rule in the Talmud and in the Torah, that if you want to annul a decree a previous generation of sages did, you have to be on the same level of chokhmah, and you have to be in the same level of multitude. You have to have just as much rabbis as they did, which is basically impossible. So therefore they say that we cannot go and undo the decree of the sages. Similarly, we do see the concept, right, that they made a takana, that we have to have repetition of the Amidah. Why do we have repetition of the Amidah? Sages tell us we have repetition of Amidah because of the people who do not know how to read and the people who are not familiar with the tefillah. So therefore they would pray with the Chazan word by word. They would hear the Chazan say it, and they would repeat, and they would be able to pray. So seemingly today, this takana does not really apply in our times. The reason doesn't exist anymore. Everybody has a sidur. Everyone more or less knows how to read. And everyone more or less doesn't need the Chazan really. So why just skip all this extra time we take by doing repetition of the Amidah? It saves so much time. Everybody gets out of shul earlier. But no, we're not allowed to, because once the rabbis made the enactment, even though the reason does not apply, we are not able to annul what they established. Yes?
So why did the other Achronim say it's fine?
So they argue that this is not one of those decrees that was made as a takana. This was more of a rabbi's arousing a suspicion, and therefore, if you have reasons to not be suspicious, it's allowed. It's not a decree. The Prehadash will tell you this is not a decree that the rabbi said, even though the reason will not apply one day, it still applies.
Based off what, like the wording of it?
Yeah. The machloket is this decree. What kind of decree was it?
What's another example of that?
Of what? Of the chachamim being not making it in such a way it's
not
a decree?
But it's more of like a warning, caution, precautionary. Are there examples like that? You know off the top of your head?
No, we could think of one though. It's not coming to my mind, but we could think of one. We could talk about it afterwards.
But if there's something that's for sure considered by all posting to be that, then all posting would agree.
Right. So now the Khazanesh also spoke about this. He says that well, before we move on to Khazanesh, the Aruch HaShulchan, he says that in truth, really, kol gzerat chachamim, any decree the rabbis made, levat tamam nigle, even though they told you a reason, yesh od harbe ta'amim kumusim shelo gilu otam. The Aruch HaShulchan says, even though you know the rabbi said a reason to why they made a decree, you should know there's a lot of hidden reasons they didn't tell you. Every decree is like that. So just because they told you this is the reason, you found a way that this reason doesn't apply, you should know there's a lot of other reasons they had in mind that they didn't tell us everything. So a person can't be so smart with the rabbis. So the Khazanesh, he says, he goes with the leniency. He says today, yesh pikuach memshala. He says today that we have the government, right? We have the American government, USDA. USDA made it that it is illegal to add into your cow milk, into your cow bottles, to add other animals' milk, and you'll actually get fined. You'll lose your license as a dairy farm. You'll get into big repercussions with the government. So he says, the Khazanesh says, in such a case, since there's room to say that you're going to get punished for adding non-kosher milk, so therefore it's similar to the case of the Ramah, where the maidservants are in the Jewish house or Jewish neighborhood.
Didn't you just say that there's other reasons why they didn't give?
Yeah, so from the fact that Khazanesh argues, it shows that he follows that what? No, this is the one reason. For instance, the rabbis told us this is the reason, this is the only reason. He argues with Aruch Shulchan. And he says also, this is not a decree that even though the reason doesn't apply, it still exists. Rather, once the reason's gone, it's gone. Yeah.
So why don't we hold by this?
Oh, one second. You gotta be wait. Once you let the food cook, first you add the oil, and then the meat, and then you add all the carrots, and then at the end you add the rice, and the plof is still delicious. So you can't just jump at the end. Yeah.
The thing with the enactions can change. Like people davening, not everyone can still read necessarily.
But there's an overwhelming majority, and there's an overwhelming reason to say that maybe in a place where we know everyone's very religious, let's say Bnei Brak. Why don't they get rid of Bnei Brak? Why not? Yeah? Okay, fine. So the Rav Moshe Feinstein says even a bigger chidush. Rav Moshe Feinstein says, besides for the fact that the USDA is on top of this, they don't add non-kosher milk, he says that what? He says that this should not just be treated as the reason of adding non-kosher milk is mixed in. He says even those opinions who argue, the Khatam Sofer and the Aruch HaShulchan, they would also agree to me that it should be mutar. Why? He says once we have the government and people checking, right? How do the government give people fines? How do they take away the license? They go and they send their people to go check and see if everything's going well. So we have technically people who are going to check for us. We don't even need to go. It's like they're our shluchim. It's like they're doing the verification for us. So it's as if we have people there. It's as if it's Chalav Yisrael already.
Who says this?
The Moshe Feinstein. He says since we have people checking for us anyway, so it's as if we're there. It's as if we see it mamash. We have their reports. We could see in the records who got fined, who didn't, and we'll see from there. It's already as if what was the whole reason? What was the whole reason the Jew seeing it makes it mutar? It's because the goy is afraid. The goy is afraid. People are going to check on him. We have the same thing over here, so it should be the same thing as if a Jew is going. That's what the Igrot Moshe, the Rav Moshe Feinstein wants to say, that even the Khatam Sofer, even the ones who are machmir, would agree and permit the milk made in America. In America, he's talking about America, because in other countries they don't have USDA like we do have. They don't have the infrastructure. So just because you're lenient, you follow Rav Moshe Feinstein in America, doesn't mean if you go to South Africa or if you go to London or you go to any other place in the world, I don't need to keep Chalav Yisrael here. Maybe Chalav Yisrael in a different country would be more and more strict.
Yeah, but even he probably kept Chalav Yisrael.
Yeah, for sure.
Why then? If he's saying
no, he even at the end of his tshuva, he writes. He says, therefore one wants to rely on this to be lenient. There's a very good reason. He says most people are Torah observant and many rabbis as well, and heaven forbid that we should say they're acting against the law. However, Baal Nefesh, somebody who cares about his neshama, it's appropriate to be stringent, and it's not considered to being haughty. And this is how I myself act.
So according to him,
he doesn't rely on his own leniency. No, it's okay. It's good.
According to him, the Lechatchila is fine then.
Lechatchila. No, he still says you should be machmir.
Oh, you just said that. The rabbis who do it are fine.
Yeah, it's fine. The letter of law, it's fine. Heaven forbid we should say they're sinning. Heaven forbid.
So b'diavad, you said that's sinning practically if you did it already. According to him, remember you said if someone does it b'diavad, if he already did it, it's whatever. He said you could actively do it. Seemingly.
We're gonna get there.
According to Moshe, the Lechatchila is okay.
Technically, he says that even the Khatam Sofer would agree that it should be considered as if we mamash saw the goy milking it. However, there is the Yakud Yosef. The Yakud Yosef, he has his opinion on the matter, and this is who we follow by. And Ravaya writes about it in Chelek Daled of Yechavedad, and Chelek Zayin of Yechavedad, and Yabi Omer, he speaks about it, and he says like this. He says, Yesh Omrim, some say, Makom en chalav tameh matzui, when there's no non-kosher milk around, there's no animals to get them from, right? Ok she'en ketaud mischarid, it's not worth it to put in non-kosher milk financially. He says then minhag Sfaradim la'atir. He says some say that the minhag is to be mutar. Veyesh cholkim. Some argue and say no, it can't be mutar. Vechen ikar le'achmir. And he says, so is this is the primary opinion, and the opinion is to be stringent.
So it's a machloket of customs?
He says, some argue the custom is to be allowed, some argue the custom is to be stringent, and he says, v'chen ikar, the opinion to be stringent is the main opinion, that's what we follow. He says, why do some say that the opinion is to be lenient? Because many poskim, like the Radbaz, and the Kaf Chaim, and I saw many rabbis who bring it from, let's say myself, Moroccan Minhag. They bring in the Moroccan Minhagim book that the Minhag in Morocco was to drink, not Chalav Yisrael, to be lenient because of these reasons that we mentioned before. However, he brings both opinions, and he says the opinion to be Machmir is the correct opinion. And he says, Yesh Omrim, he says, but then there's talking about Chutz La'aretz, about outside of Israel. He says in countries where there's a law that you're not allowed to add non-kosher milk. He says some want to say that you're allowed to drink over there Chalav Ishmael. He says Yesh Cholkim, some argue and they say no, you're not allowed to rely on the country, you're not allowed to rely on the government. He says also some argue that even though the reason doesn't exist, this is a takana that the Chachamim made, and once they made a takana, we cannot start reasoning with the enactments of the rabbis. Once they made it, we cannot nullify it. We have to be on the same level as they were in order to nullify their laws. He says, someone who lives outside of Israel, constantly, that's where he lives, it's difficult for them to be stringent on this, Chalav Yisrael. Everything is Chalav Ishmael, and very, very few things is very Chalav Yisrael, and even the Chalav Yisrael to get it is very hard. For example, if you live in Virginia, I remember I visited my friend in Norfolk, Virginia. He told me that the Cholov guys, the Avrechim, they have to drive all the way to Baltimore. They have to drive somewhere far, freeze the milk, and then bring it back home in order to have Chalav Yisrael. So this is so very hard. It's very difficult. What if they don't sell it in your store? There's no big Jewish supermarket. There's no a lot of Jews who live around you. So he says, in such a case, it's very hard for them to get Chalav Yisrael. He says, someone wants to be lenient, he has what to rely on, even though if he's not sick. For sure, if he's sick, there's more reason to be lenient. But even if he's not sick, since it's hard for him to get Chalav Yisrael, he can be lenient. This is Yaakov Yosef, yes.
So if you go on vacation and there's no Chalav Yisrael there,
it's hard to get, yeah.
Technically you can get anything.
Yeah. But if you're here, and Hershey's is looking at you and he's winking at you, and Butterfinger is looking at you, and Hershey Kiss is trying to give you a kiss, right?
You're not allowed to do it because it's a custom.
He says you should be machmir.
Because it's a custom. But it's
He
not
says,
halacha.
what?
It's not halacha.
He didn't say the word minhag. He says,
You said minhag. You said there's differences in minhags.
yeah, so he says, what opinion do we follow? What is the minhag? The minhag is the like machmir.
So it's a minhag.
But he's saying that's what you should do. He's saying that's what you should do. If someone would ask him, what should I do? That's what he would tell you.
Is it like not eating kevach eshag?
Nah.
No. Let's say at most, to be very honest, at most, even if, let's say, I got milk from a goy, and he mixed in some non-kosher milk, will be Yisur D'Oraita or D'Rabanan. So it depends if there's nullification. Let's say I have majority kosher milk, and he only mixed in a little bit non-kosher milk. So at most it'll be batel in rov or batel in 160. So it wouldn't even be D'Oraita. But still, at the end of the day, he says we have to be machmir, like those opinions who say, even though the reason does not exist, the suspicion does not exist, we cannot get rid of the sages' decrees willy-nilly. We have to be on the same level as them. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, alav shalom, the Rebbe Lubavitch, his merit should be protection for us. He says like this. He says someone asked in regards to Chalav Yisrael, Ishmael milk. He says, he quotes from the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, his father-in-law. He says the ones who drink Chalav Akum, Chalav Ishmael, they have in them, it raises in them questions of faith. They start having doubts in emunah because they drink the Chalav Ishmael. Rav Eliyahu Bakshi Doron, he should live a long life. He was one of the previous chief rabbis of Israel. He says he believes that another reason why Chalav Yisrael was made to be as a decree is because if we do a lot of business and get milk, people back in the day, the milkman was their friend. The milkman was someone you were close to. the guy the guy who gave you milk, you had to deal with him all the time. Everybody needs milk every other day, right? So he says that another reason the rabbis made it Chalav Yisrael is a big thing is because they didn't want assimilation. If Jews will be able to drink Chalav Yishmael, they'll be okay living in a Goyish place. Because I could just drink their milk, what's the problem? And they'll be close to the Goyim. But if the rabbis made a decree that Chalav Yisrael, you need to have Chalav Yishmael, you're not allowed to, so then they'll be forced, it'll be harder for them to live in a far out place where there's only Goyim. And they'll think, more importantly, I should live in a place where there's Jews. It'll be easier to get Chalav Yisrael. So that's what he claims. There's another reason why a person should make sure to have Chalav Yisrael. Very interestingly, very interestingly, Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, who was a great rabbi, who was a rabbi in YU, and he writes that he himself was lenient with Chalav Yisrael. He says that there's actually a third reason to be lenient. He says today the milk is not even milked by goyim; it's milked by machines. He's milked by machines, so it's not even. But the question is, who started the machine? The machine is a tool, right? So who has what status? Yeah, it's a machine. Is it a person of itself, or is the machine an extension of the person who turned it on? So it's a machlok. But I'm just telling you, there's another opinion. He throws it to the mix. Yes.
And usually with the machines, it's one big tank, Rabbi. So I mean, you can't get into the tank and pour something.
You're saying it goes straight into pipes. There's nothing. There's nothing. There's no access.
Lasers scan it right away, and then it just comes off.
I hear you. What?
OU has to be there too because they're putting their stamp on it.
Emet. But the problem is that the OU, they're not promising that it's Chalav Yisrael. Rather, they're lenient in this matter. They rely on Moshe Feinstein, they rely on Khazanesh, and they're saying that this food is kosher. Why? Because it doesn't have non-kosher in it in regards to ingredients. But milk, it's not Chalav Yisrael. We didn't watch it.
They don't even check the facilities.
No, they do. It's just they're not there constantly to give it a status of Chalav Yisrael.
But Mashgiach is never there constantly. So
I understand, but the thing is that as long as they're checking that they're not adding anything into the milk, it's just straight milk. So then they rely on them, and they don't constantly check in them as they would with another thing that needs a constant mashgiach. You understand? So that's the leniency of the Ramah. That's the leniency.
And like Snickers, I heard it's powder.
Right.
Is that also like the leniency on that, or is that?
So whoever is machmir on this is machmir on that.
Even if it's not like.
Right. Right.
It's not milk.
What if the cow is sick, Rabbi, and it's like mixed into it?
It's a problem.
You know what I mean, like a blemish or whatever, or.
Yakud Yosef writes about powdered milk, which is used in chocolates. He says it's appropriate and correct to be stringent in this matter as well.
What does that mean, correct to be stringent?
Lechatchila, the best thing to do is not to eat it.
So b'diavad I can eat Twix?
Yes.
B'diavad I can drink milk, that's...
Yes, if you have nothing else.
There's a difference.
When you go to the store to buy it, lechatchila or b'diavad?
If I need to save money,
Let's say lechatchila. It's considered lechatchila. So you should lechatchila buy the Chalav Yisrael one.
Is Cholov Yisrael the same status as Beit Yosef?
Why are you comparing things? You don't need to compare things. The halacha is the halacha.
I keep Cholov Yisrael, I'm just asking.
I understand, but you don't need to compare and say, well, if this is 50 points and this is only 40 points, no, because this is 60 points, it's more than that one. Okay, so I'll keep it. It doesn't work like that.
I want to know what I should keep first.
You should keep everything.
Grow slowly.
Okay, but if you compare, you might get stuck like that.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Let's say out of 100 cows, right, in the whole warehouse, one of them has like a messed up lung or whatever. You don't know about it, but it's mixed in the milk, their milk. Something that comes out of non-kosher animals, also non-kosher. That's true. But I'm not sure if that's like a very weird case. I understand when you do shchita, you check and you make sure that it's not tarif. But while it's alive, it's very hard to assume. Usually the moms who they milk the cows, they just gave birth. They have a lot of trauma and what I mean.
I hear you. Maybe I looked into it and I saw that they do bring up such a point, and they say that it's not a problem in America. It's not. Maybe in a place where they don't have such good infrastructure and they treat the cows like whatever, and it's a whatever place. I hear it. They might be mistreated. They might be sick, and then we don't even know. But in America, some write that this is not an issue.
So if you live somewhere where there is no Chalav Yisrael milk,
it's very hard to get. Yeah.
It's hard to get. When you go up to Shemayim, are they gonna judge?
You're gonna tell them, I'm gonna call Rav Moshe Feinstein and the Khazanesh and the Prehadash, and I'm going to tell them they're my lawyers. Here, speak to them. I follow their books. If you say I'm wrong, you say they're wrong. You understand?
Same goes with BSL also. Like it's
Look
hard
for
to
her.
get.
There, over there. It's going to be.
Certain places in America it's hard to get. No? All over.
We spoke about it in that class what we had to speak about. Okay, fine. Now I wanted to end off with what the Pele Yoetz says. Pele Yoetz writes in the entry called Divrei Chachamim, the words of the sages. He's talking about the words of the sages in general. He says it's very well known how important and how severe we should treat the words of the sages. The Gemara Masechet Brachot says, whoever goes against the words of the sages, he says, oh Rabbi, it's only the Rabbanan? Okay, the Rabbanan, what's the big deal? Okay, so what? Oh, it's not in the Torah, Rabbi? So I don't keep it. It's only the Rabbi said it. Says the Gemara Masechet Brachot, whoever goes against the words of the sages, Chayav Mita, is deserving of death. And we spoke many times before where we see this concept. We see it by Zaken Mamre, when there is the Sanhedrin and one elder still disagrees and does not give in to the majority. The Torah says that you kill that elder who does not give in to the majority of the sages. So you see there is somebody who goes against sages and deserving of death. So then the Pele Yoetz says, he says, I see many people, the Amei Haaretz, the ignoramuses, they're lenient and they say, oh, I know better, and they go against the sages and they say, for example, he brings an example, Chalav shechalvo akum. He says milk that was milked by a goy, and there's no Jew watching him. And we know the reason the Gemara says it's asur is because maybe they mixed in non-kosher milk. He says, mitpartzim, there are those who go over the fence and they go against the grain and they say, no, since they gave us a reason, so now that there's no non-kosher milk available, we can say it's a lenient. We can be lenient and be mutar, make it mutar. We can drink chalav Yishmael. And he says, they should realize they're making a grave mistake because the sage's words never have annulment. And the Torah was not given to each person to decide on his own. We have to listen to the sages. And he says many places the rabbis made it a blanket statement, and it does. There's no exceptions. He says, and even though someone who goes against their words, even though it might be there's no non-kosher milk in there, you're right, maybe you're right. He says still, it's as if you're eating non-kosher food. Why? He says, because we only have the words of the Chachamim, and he says for sure, besides the fact that they said a simple reason, the pshat, oh, maybe they're going to mix non-kosher milk, he says there's yesh bahem kama tzfunei sodot, there's many secret reasons, many spiritual reasons why they said it's not allowed. Like we said from Lubavitch Rabbi, that whoever drinks it, right, he'll have questions in faith. And he says, we should learn and accustom ourselves to whenever the sages say something, not to turn left, not to turn right. And the Torah says that you should not go left and right. And then Rashi says over there, what does it mean don't go left and right? Even when the sages tell you left is right and right is left, you also have to listen to them. Because once we start thinking we know better, that's when the Torah and its explanations and its truth will be mistreated and not kept properly, God forbid. So therefore he says that a person needs to be very careful to keep the sage's words with the utmost respect, go out of his way to treat the rabbis carefully and not to think he knows better than the sages because they know way better than us. The sages tell us that whoever's name was mentioned in the Gemara, it means he had the ability to mechayem etim, to bring back, to resurrect from the dead. So if a person is saying something in the Gemara, it means a very holy person. If you have to imagine, just a small example, the Baba Sali is saying it. You would go against the Baba Sali. No, I know better than Baba Sali. You know, you have to imagine something like that in your head, times a million, when you start speaking about rabbis in the Gemara. So a person has to not give himself a pat on the back and thinks because he knows a little bit, so now he can start arguing. Yes, the person has to think before he speaks. So now, when ending off that section.